Hi, friends. Shay Crowell again. I am here to moderate this panel discussion. I've invited some guests from the audience to come up and participate today. We are having a discussion today about what are our next steps, what are some personal reflections, events from our lives that we can bring to inform this discussion. And as we as a community plan what comes next for our community, how do we pull the community together to accomplish the things we need to accomplish? So first of all, I want to thank you all for agreeing to participate today. I am super looking forward to hearing from all of you and getting to know you a little bit better. How about if we just take a minute or two and maybe start with Tyler, if that's okay, and have you sort of introduce yourself to the people out in the audience.
All right. So my name's Tyler Kibbe, pronouns he, they. I'm actually on the advisory board. I was the recipient of the Academic Achievement Award in 2019, I believe. So pre-pandemic conference. I'm really excited to be back in person here again this year. So in terms of my actual sort of where I'm at, so I'm currently located at the University of Kentucky. I'm a dual degree MA/JD student looking at diplomacy and international law. I'm also a PhD candidate in linguistics at Humboldt University in Berlin. So I have a lot of different hats that I wear. So I mainly focus on LGBTQ activism within academia, but a majority of my research also focuses on theopolitical ideologies in Tennessee politics.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Bayla, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, my name is Bayla Close. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a writer for Sidelines, which is the student-run news organization here. This was my first year attending this conference, although I will be back just about every single year I can, I've decided. I grew up in a more rural part of East Tennessee, and so this was a big first experience of a lot of being surrounded by queer positivity. And I've really enjoyed being able to learn more about people's experiences and their stories, and also just about what is happening in both our past and our future in queer history and the present, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Bayla. Mary, you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Well, you heard a little bit about me earlier, but yeah, my activism grew along the way. I am now involved in several activist organizations. I do a lot of phone calling, writing letters, going to the Capitol. Although the organizations that I belong to, although they have national components, they're local, but we found that there is no way that we can concentrate just on local issues. If we want LGBTQ, for example, issues, we have to go to the Capitol. We have to go and, protest, make them know that we're out here. Let them know we're fed up. This last, I was very proud of the kids that came out after the shooting at the school. So I'm on my hobby horse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And last, I'd like to introduce to you Amy Aldridge. Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Amy Aldridge Sanford. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of communication. I'm also author of a book, From Thought to Action, Developing a Social Justice Orientation. I'm also a higher ed administrator here at MTSU. So my work for the past decade has really focused on people's journeys to direct action and what that looks like, barriers to those journeys, those sorts of things. If you were here on Thursday, you heard me tell a longer story about that, but it really started with me expanding on McAdams' work from the 1960s when he studied freedom riders. We find the barriers are pretty similar 50 years later when we look at college students. The other thing I find myself doing a lot with is allyship journeys. And when things start to get hard, how people respond to that and how we can encourage people to continue to act in allyship, even when the journey gets hard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Shay Crowell, she, they. I am a public school educator, veteran educator, 22 years. I am the GSA sponsor at a high school here in Rutherford County for the past 10 years. Founded that club. And then I have been singing with Nashville in Harmony for 15 years. And I'm the founder of their youth choir, which was started in 2017 and is now, it's going to sing tonight, actually, if you come to the faculty dinner. I'm excited about that. And I'm also on the board of Rainbow Rutherford, which is a community organization for LGBT people here in Rutherford County. So I don't know, that's me. So let's start with a discussion of what you think the next step should be for the LGBTQ community. What do you think? Takers? What do you think the next step might be for the LGBTQ plus community? Tyler?
So maybe I can't speak exactly to what I think the next step is, but in terms of what we're thinking about when taking the next step, one thing that's really caught my attention in the last year is that even as we've been seeing headway and sort of securing more federal protections and state protections for certain LGBTQ related rights, at the same time, we also see a more directed and targeted effort towards taking away those rights in very complex ways that we wouldn't have seen necessarily 20 or 30 years ago. So I think it almost necessitates that the next step is more targeted and political and more nuanced in terms of not just fighting for rights, but also trying to understand the more complex ways that people are beginning to try and take away those rights.
Thank you. Mir?
First of all, I want to thank you for being a public school, being in the public schools. It's the LGBTQ plus community has not had a good relationship with the public schools in some instances. I know that, with bullying and teasing and things like that. However, and what is happening is that funds are being taken away from the public schools and given to religious schools, such as charter, and increasingly so to charter schools, which are technically public schools, but not really. What I see moving forward is I see a concerted effort for all of us, LGBTQ plus people and allies, to try to ensure that public schools receive enough funds to do what needs to be done, to stop the bullying, to stop these egregious bathroom laws and things like that. The Christian nationalists are definitely trying to kill public schools and bring up Christian religious schools. So I really think we need to work together to make public schools better.
Thank you, Mir. Amy, you want to answer that one?
Well, I was just gonna say that we can tell that you're an experienced activist because she went straight to the system that needs fixed. And I think that's really important that we're always identifying the system. I think for a long time, we've really focused on interpersonal relationships, which are important, but you're not gonna see real change until you start going for codes and laws and legislation and policies and procedures. And so I think that's really important. But I also think it's important for us to recognize that everyone's not there yet, right? And when I talk to people, it's a numbers game, right? We can't always expect people who are minoritized and marginalized to do all the work. And I think that's been going on for a really long time. The numbers game requires that people who are guests in the LGBTQIA plus community get in there and do the work too. And I would say for anyone listening today who may be in that category of just trying to figure out how to get started, I just will say that it's about self-reflection first. And that work has to happen before you can move into direct action, because we all know how dangerous a person can be if they haven't done the self-reflection education before they get to direct action.
Yes, I have definitely experienced that personally. Kayla, would you like to add anything to this as our college student rep on this panel?
Yeah, so I don't mind talking about this. I have obviously only been out of the public, well, I'm still in the public school system, but in high school, obviously, so I'm talking about is advocacy for youth is so important. And it wasn't something that I had growing up. There was no great gay straight lines in my high school. There was no talk about it. If you were going under any kind of gender affirming care, you got bullied pretty heavily. You know, I talked about growing up in a very rural part of East Tennessee. We're talking Appalachian Mountains, if you can hear from my accent a little bit. Making sure that these kids feel accepted and knowing that they are safe as they get older and that they are going to get out of that area is so important. And it starts at a state level. It starts with teachers making sure that these kids are protected. And it's just, I'm getting a little bit emotional, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, I was not prepared for this.
Emotions are welcome here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But yeah, I believe that I didn't know what I could do whenever I was younger. And then I came to college and I learned that there is so much work that has been done and it will be continued to need to be done with securing rights for the queer community and its allies.
So what I hear from our panel is we need visibility and we need protective legislation. I'm going to invite the audience. Do you have any comments or questions for our panel? Or just personal anecdotes that you'd like to share that can maybe inform what you think our next steps are? Please. You're welcome to come up on the stage or come close so I can hear you. Thank you so much.
People have mentioned visibility in the system, but I find an issue currently that we have within the community is the growing use of new labels and new terms. So how can we have real visibility if we keep making new terms, new labels, and stuff like law is kind of hard set and interpreted a certain way? How can we make sure that these new labels and new terms are still under this umbrella within the community without hurting ourselves with the laws being outdated continuously and with the community kind of just scrambling in a sense?
Yeah. What was your name?
Dawn,
Dawn, and your pronoun?
eBay.
He, they. Okay, so Dawn, he, they has asked a really interesting question about identifying identifying labels and how as we have continued discussions, there are more and more labels that we use to identify ourselves, to make ourselves visible. But as we legislate and pass laws to protect people of varying identities, sometimes the new labels might not fall under the old vocabulary used within the law. So how do we create laws to protect people of newer identities? Panel?
So linguist, I can jump in on some of that.
Sure.
So I'm going to try and not get into the weeds on this, but so from a linguistic perspective, your question is really interesting. First, in terms of the nature of legislation and sort of the language of legislation. So the problem there is that no matter how hard we try, the language of law is never static or set in stone. And so I think a good example is from 2016, the Tennessee legislature passed the Natural and Ordinary Meaning Amendment, if anybody remembers that, where they looked at the law and they said, okay, man and woman as words in the Tennessee Code is not defined, and we're going to define it in such a way that it excludes transgender and non-binary individuals. Because up until that point, it hadn't. So it had been technically inclusive just based on the reading of the language. And so they went out of their way to make sure that it specifically excluded them. So in terms of legislation, that's always going to be a continuous fight over sort of language and definitions. In terms of the ever evolving sort of identifiers within our community and how we expand and define that community. From a legal perspective, we would mostly be working at the categorical level. So instead of talking about Black Americans or African Americans or any specific ethnic group, we're talking about a racial category and protections based on racial discrimination, right? Same goes for gender and sexuality. So within the law, it would be fighting over what is gender, what is sexuality, how do we define it within the code. But because of the way that language changes and the way that we identify changes, it happens so quickly that the law could never keep up in the first place. And so even though I really want to emphasize the importance of taking the next step sort of to the courts, to legislatures around the country, when we get to the sort of these new questions, that has to remain at the interpersonal level, especially when it's the younger generation, also the most disenfranchised generation, that is sort of innovating in these areas, right? So hopefully that didn't get into the weeds too much.
Would any other panel member like to address this? Dr. Aldridge.
As a communication scholar, let's build on that a little bit. I think this changing language is really important because we have language that hasn't been seeing you, right? And so the labels are good, and I'm glad they come out of the community instead of being brought down on you, like the legislature often does, right? But I think it's really important that we don't use words to exclude people who may have an interest in the community but don't know the language, because that's the barrier I hear a lot from people who want to be a good friend to the community. They're scared that they're going to say the wrong word, use the wrong pronoun, and I hear this a lot. And so I think it's important to show grace to people outside and allow them the opportunity to correct and learn the language. I think that education is really important. I understand it can be fatiguing. And once they hear it once or twice, they need to pick it up and use it, but I think that education of others and not using language to exclude is really important, because it's been done to the community for so long. We don't want to do it to others who have an interest in being a friend to the community.
I am not going to sound nearly as educated as these other panelists do, but from my personal perspective, I didn't come out as non-binary for a very long time for several reasons. I didn't come out until 6 months ago, actually. And a big issue with that is because I put myself into this box. You have to be trans-masc if you are assigned female at birth to be non-binary, and then vice versa if you were assigned male at birth or everything like that. And that's a big thing. I have a lot of issues with labels in the queer community. Is a big part of the community is putting aside those labels. We have had those labels put on us for hundreds of years, for all time, and breaking through that is a huge issue that we're having. Out of breath, I need to remember to breathe. So I'm very opinionated on a lot of things, and I apologize for that. But breaking through those labels is very important. But also, if we get rid of those, it causes a lot of issues with legislation, sorry. And I don't remember where I was going to end this, and I apologize for that.
That's okay. Mayor, did you want to add anything?
Well, I just want to talk on the subject of legislation. That a lot of legislatures now are trying to define, like you said, and what is a man, what is a woman. Marriage should be between a man and a woman. What does that mean? Recently in the I believe it was in the Senate, they had when they were questioning Judge, the new African-American judge, whose name escapes me, I'm sorry. Ted Cruz kept questioning her. What is a woman? What is a woman? Can you define a woman? And she was like, I'm not going to. You're not going to force me to say what a woman is or what a man is. Because as we've seen and as we've grown, we've seen that the definitions are fluid and that there are many, many aspects that we're not aware of. I'm talking about us on the, the allies on, on the outside, which, by the way, we don't want to be. We would like to be on the inside with you. That's very, very important. The labels, I think, are useful to us, but we need to be educated. We need to understand. We don't want to know what you do in your bedroom. That's not our business. But what your identity is, how do we, help you? How do we acknowledge you?
So a thought occurred to me. What would you think about our government taking a position of, I don't know, atheism with regard to gender and sexual orientation? If we're all supposed to be equal before the law, then the government shouldn't be legislating identities to begin with. But then there are protected minority groups that need special recognition because of their experiences. So how do you balance those? Did I make any sense at all? Yes, okay. So, for example, we never needed our government to define what a man is versus what a woman is. Like, that was an unnecessary piece of legislation. But they certainly have used our conversations about sexual orientation and gender identity and our increasing, awareness of our diversity and our increasing visibility of that diversity, as we use it as a way to acknowledge ourselves, make ourselves visible, celebrate ourselves, you know what I mean? To make ourselves visible to others so that others can see themselves in us. But I feel like people who would legislate identity have been using it as a tool to divide. The LGBTQ community for years was lumped together, but today they're taking the T part of the LGBTQ community and, saying, oh, with this part, we're going to legislate. We're fine with the LGB people, but not so much with the T. And so they're using it as a wedge issue to divide our community. And so I agree with many of the panelists in terms of a need for education. Because I think both within the LGBTQ community and outside of the community among our allies, there needs to be education about what allyship is and how allyship is an action verb, not just an identity that you sit with. It requires action, it requires, movement, it requires education. So there is an education component to it that needs to happen in order for us to have informed discussion. I'm not sure where I was going with this. Nope, not sure where I was going with this. Lost my train of thought. So I'm going to say, hey, audience, do you have any comments, questions about what I have said or what any of the panelists have said? I see Steve.
I'm Steve Woe. Him is I was a tax accountant for 14 years, MTSU grad. Then I was a Catholic priest, parish priest for 22, led some Holy Weeks. Now I'm retired. I'm married to Bill, so I'm no longer a Catholic priest. But I'm very active in PFLAG, which is originally was Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And one of the graces of that experience for me, it was originally for me a place where I could go and talk about my struggles with trying to be faithful to my vocation as a priest in a church that was saying, other things about me. And I was very welcome there. Flag right now is, I won't say overwhelmed, but we have a lot of folks coming to us with trans children, young children, fully grown adult children. And one of the things that I watch these parents do, in addition to supporting each other, is they're wrestling with the conflict between reality and ideas. So Pope Francis, one of the things that he has said is that realities are greater than ideas. We have to have ideas about how things are, how the world operates in order to get out of bed and go live our day. And we all have these, and a lot of them are illusions that we discover as time goes by. This thing that I thought, the idea that I was living by, is not really true, because now I'm confronted with reality. So these parents had an idea about, or no idea at all about the whole trans question, and now they're confronted with the reality of their son or daughter who they love, and so they're now coming to terms with that, wrestling with that reality. I think the whole world is doing that too, and they are allies. I mean, for me, the parents of LGBTQ folks are like the icon of what an ally is, and they have something to say. I was at a conference not too long ago. I play the ukulele, an old time music conference, and this old guy, when we were talking about our history, he said he had a trans grandchild, and he said, "I don't understand it." He said, "But I'll figure it out, because this is about my grandchild." And I think that's what's going on. Some people have reading this book by John Deacon about songs in America. He quotes the vice president of the Confederacy, who said, "This is reality. Reality is that white people are superior to Negroes." So how he put it in a speech that he gave right after the formation of the Confederacy. And he said, "The rest of the world will foolishly figure this out, and we'll be right. They'll show that we were right." And we know that that's wrong, right? That's not correct. And a different reality has shown itself. So anyway, I'm just, there are some people who will carry these ideas that are contrary to reality to their graves. But a lot of people are going to get it, because people want to live in the real world. You have any comments about that? That helps.
Well, Steve, I have certainly experienced that. My own mother is a very conservative evangelical person, and she very much would prefer it if reality bit to her understanding of how the world should work versus the reality of how it is working. And sometimes finding common ground and ways to just common language in order to communicate ideas, in order to express identity and find common understanding is really, really difficult. Yeah, I feel you there. You had a comment question. Would you like to be mic'd so the audience can hear you? Steve spoke loudly, but I'm not. Do you speak loudly?
Shay, can I say something about what Steve just
Oh,
said?
yeah,
Or-
yeah, I'm
Or
sorry.
were you going to comment on Steve? Okay, I just want to say something because I first of all want to acknowledge, well, your journey and your willingness to talk about it, because that representation matters so much. And a lot of people who look like you, Steve, aren't accepting of LGBTQIA plus communities. So we need people who look like you saying what you're saying. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge that not all parents and families come around. There's a lot of trans folks and people in the LGBTQI community who aren't receiving this sort of love, right? And that saddens me. And you hope they find a family of choice when that happens. But I also want to, because I want to acknowledge Harvey Milk, who was a gay rights activist. He embodied gay rights. He was a gay man in the 1970s. And he told people at that time who were gay men and lesbian women, for the most part, that they needed to come out to their families, which was a really scary thing at that time because a lot of very unfair things were happening to people who they were very much legislated. And he encouraged them to come out to their families because he said the personal will become political, and he was right? It worked for a lot of people. And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of these trans children today, right? These parents we thought would never come around are coming around, and they are becoming some of the best advocates and allies out there. And I think it's a real test to that unconditional love. And some of them are passing it and some of them aren't, right? But it's that real test. And what I will often tell people is give them some time. I think a lot of times when you come out to somebody, you've been working through it for a while. And it may be a big surprise to the person who you come out to. And so just give them some time, and some grace. And someone did that for me, right? And that's the only reason I've gotten where I'm at. And so just encourage you, if you're someone listening who hasn't had that happen for you, find the family of choice that you need and give your other family some time. And hopefully they will come around and become these great advocates that Steve has seen through PFLAG.
I would like to comment that if you're looking for, to say to people, if you're looking for allies, look in your family, not your immediate family, because you may have a problem there, but in your greater family. This is from personal experience. A cousin of mine came out, and his family, his parents, his siblings did not accept him. But he found allies in the greater circle, people that took him in and helped him financially and in supporting ways. So I think that's advice that I would give a lot of folks who are trying to get support.
Go ahead, Dayla. Thank you.
I had an experience that was kind of relates to this. Whenever I was 15, I came out as bisexual to my grandmother. Very impulsively. It was a silent car ride. I decided I needed to do something. And I had just recently started dating a girl. I decided it was the time. She said one phrase to me, and my grandmother was one of my best friends. And she says one phrase to me, and that was, "It's a phase." And it destroyed me. We didn't talk about it for years. I dated this girl for a year and I never brought her home. It eventually ended, and we didn't talk about it. And then my senior year of high school, I was a bit more open about my sexuality and everything. And, oh gosh, sorry. And it was more of well, if you're still feeling this way, I guess that's who you are. But that was it. We didn't talk about it anymore. It was just nice to feel that acceptance. I was home for spring break weeks ago or so. I have a book that I've been reading that says y'all means all. It's about queer culture in Appalachia. And my grandmother sees me reading it. She goes, "Can I read that after you?" Yeah, and I just recently mailed it back to her because I finished it, and she's actually trying to put in the effort to understand a lot of queer identities and everything. It's been great. But my comment on that is give people time. Sometimes it may take a lot longer than you're prepared for it to take. And sadly, sometimes that acceptance may not come, but it will come from someone. There will always be someone who will accept you, even if it isn't who you necessarily originally reached out to.
Tyler?
Just so I'm not the, odd panelist out, and maybe to offer something a bit more lighthearted in sort of this larger discussion that tends towards something not unlike optimism, but not quite optimism sometimes. So in my personal experience as both a linguist and a cognitive scientist, coming up against this clash of realities versus ideas. So I'm queer and non-binary, but I am not stereotypically presenting as either. And I think my dad believes in his heart, he cannot reconcile, and he's like, this is a phase. And so if I haven't come out to that man 5 times in the last 10 years, because he forgets, he's like, you don't, in my head, you're not this way because you don't act it, you don't present it, right? You just look like a country boy, a farm boy because I grew up on a cattle farm. And so every couple of years, if I bring someone home or something comes up, I have to remind them, I say, hey, Dad, no, listen. It's like, I don't want to do this again next year. So as a humorous example, I mean, sometimes it's not as humorous. I think we're all aware of that, but this clash between ideas and reality is incredibly strong. And it's something that we come up against time and time again. And it's part of that journey that we've been talking about at this conference. And for a lot of people too, religion factors into that journey. Some members of our community leave religion, some find ways to reconcile with it, and some find their own faith communities. And even though faith tends to be in the public sphere the enemy of the LGBTQ community, it's also can be a really important area for finding community, right? And so I think it's important that we not lose sight of that as well.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We have one question from our audience.
Can you hear me okay? Hello? Oh,
There you
oh,
go.
hello. I wanted to bring up a little something about continuing on with allyship. I'm mostly in trans rights communities online, and a lot of the conversation that we talk about is about allies. And the trick of it is because trans people are small, we rely on our allies to speak for us. And sometimes it gets to the point where our allies are the only voice we have is through our allies. And so we don't end up getting to say, we're being talked about without being part of the conversation. And it's extremely frustrating, but at the same time, our voices are silenced by the chilling effect of transphobia and the fact that at any minute, some bad thing could happen to us. So what we've been trying to work around is like ways to elevate our voices and finding the limit of where our voices can actually be heard because we need our allies to actually help elevate us as well. And so I guess the point would be is that, when we love and need and are appreciative of our allies, but we do keep finding some of that being betrayed, and then finding the limits of trans allyship with people that have spoken for us. And then there's something that will break that, or we will say that really is harmful to us, and they get very defensive. We're canceling them, we're bullying them, we get called trans bullies. And of course, the right wing loves that, which is usually why we say, if the right wing is agreeing with you, you got a problem there. But that doesn't always come out, anything like, it just becomes this big issue of like, you're not listening to us. We're trying to tell you something. And so just with allyship is just how important you are to us. We don't much have voices, and it's also extremely terrifying. So I always thank very deeply to those, like you were saying, it's active. It's not a nice little title to put on your bio. It's something we actually need people to step up for, and even more so in people that are various religious communities, because religion does immediately, for most of us, is traumatic, but also because we're being called demons by certain groups. And, we're being so dehumanized to the point that people forget that we're human beings, and we're not all alike. We have various things. We like, Pop-Tarts in the evening or something, very simple human things. And that's why with our allyships, we appreciate the fact that you sometimes really do help keep us safe. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear from Nir as a response.
Just a reminder that at noon, when we have our fair, there are several religious organizations and churches who are represented there. And if you're feeling like, you would like to talk to them or to Americans United, please come on down and see what's going on. Thank you.
So, my book came out at the end of 2019. And I was planning on spending 2020, telling people, and I do mean telling people how to do social justice and direct action. I had a lot of things booked, right? I was gonna do that. And then March happened and I had to stay home and, ended up going online with Facebook Live, and working on a lot of panels. And the panels were mostly made up of Black folks, who had invited a few white, non-Black, but mostly white, scholars to join them. And I would usually be the only white scholar who would show up. And so I got a real lesson in humility, in 2020. And I think it's one of the best things that could have happened, to me. And the thing I learned during that year was that I needed to be a lot more quiet and listen and learn and quit trying to come in with solutions all the time. And because of that, that's where my heart is right now. It's really working with people who have a lot of privileged identities, like I do, who don't want to work in, I don't want to work in large body activism. That's not my interest, right? And so I'm going to be working in mostly communities in which I'm a guest. And what I'm having to really help people understand who also do that work is that humility is everything in this work. And being correctable is the most important thing you can do, right? And that's what I meant when I gave my introductory remarks about the allies throwing up in their hands and walking away. That's when they do it. And there's plenty of literature out there about well-meaning white cisgendered liberals who are really screwing stuff up. All right. I mean, Martin Luther King was talking about it, back in the 50s, right? I mean, this has been going on a long time. And so what I would say is that this problem isn't yours. I think you know that. It's the allies' problem. It's the people who want to work in solidarity. And until they're willing to be correctable and humble, they probably need to step out of the work. Because they should never speak for a community, ever, ever, ever. Because in your case, it's extremely, as you have said, it's extremely dangerous. I mean, to the point it can cost someone their life or livelihood, right? And so they need to do that work, and they should never, ever, ever, ever speak for the community and without your permission, period. Right. And so that's what I would say is that work's got to be done with the allies. You haven't done anything wrong. I think you know that, but I just want to affirm that.
We have a speaker from the audience, Dr. Langston.
I'd like to piggyback off that a little bit. Not to call anybody out, but the Borough Pride ban situation, a lot of folks who are on the inside of that are legally forbidden from speaking about it in public. And some of the folks who are on the planning committee have been doxxed, and it's not safe for them to be very public or have their names put out very frequently. And sometimes well-meaning allies do things like get up in front of the city council and say, well, what if we just got rid of the drag show? Then could we have Pride? And that's very inconsistent with the messaging that the Pride Planning Committee would like to sell, because Franklin said, we'll get rid of the drag show. And you saw that they barely made it and received a very discouraging speech from the mayor. Just Franklin realized that they wouldn't win a case, I think. But if you're going to be an ally and you're going to speak on behalf of a group, it's important to try to find the people involved and speak out and not speak from a place. I want to be very careful not to be mean to people who've been very helpful to us. But if you say the wrong thing, you reinforce the hater's position unintentionally. And I, like Tyler, as a gay man, I don't look it very much. And I have an extraordinary privilege in some ways from that. If I go to Home Depot and I'm loading a bunch of 2x4s in my Altima and some guy calls me out, all I say is, I lost my truck in the divorce, and suddenly he's my best friend and I get it hauled home in his truck, right? That gets me into legislative offices that a trans person can't go into because they literally won't let that person in the room. But if I go in and I say what I believe the agenda ought to be, then I'm not necessarily an ally or a helper. It's not my role to speak for people, it's to speak on behalf of people. But after making that comment, I really wanted to ask a question about something that's been disturbing me a lot lately. And it's the snipping off of letters on the LGBTQ plus acronym. And I saw a post on Reddit the other day where they were trying to ban gay marriage. And they said, see, that's because we let those transgenders be in our group. And now they're coming after gay marriage. And I'm like, they're coming after gay marriage, not transgender people. How in the world is that transgender people's fault that they're coming after gay people, right? But the move is out there and it appears to be coming from within the community, although I don't believe it is, but to make us believe it is, that we should get rid of people and then we'll have our rights. What do we do to stop that? How do we combat that viewpoint?
Well, the first comment I would like to make is that's exactly what they are trying to do, is divide the community. And this is, again, straight out of the playbook. That's why you've got bathroom bills and, you know, transgender healthcare bills and so on. So that's the comment I wanted to make. How you overcome that, again, it's not my place to say. But whatever you want to do, I'm there to help.
So I helped organize the Committee on LGBTQ Issues and Linguistics at the Linguistic Society of America, which I served on as chair for a number of years. And we, as you might expect of a linguistic society, we spent a good 3 days arguing viciously with each other over how we were going to do the committee's acronym, because CO LGBTQ plus IL wasn't really working. So eventually we decided on Z as a stand-in for the whole acronym. And so we became CAUSAL, COZIL. So the acronym has some aspects of it that itself pose problems. But in terms of how we start the community, and we see this, we saw this a few years ago with Twinks for Trump, if anybody remembers them, is these identities, the community is peninsular, right? It is connected to other identities, but it's not entirely isolated from them at the same time. And so we're still attached to these larger systems of privilege, these larger institutions of marginalization. And so in every era, for every issue, we're always going to see groups that are going to try and throw others under the bus to secure their own rights that we've been able to get in the last 10, 20 years. And that's not an issue that's ever going to go away. Right now, the sort of the topical issue is trans rights. But in 30 years, it could be a completely different group. And we might see the equivalent of a transgender people for Trump group that come out and say, well, we've got our rights. Now, what about these new people that we've added to our community? So while it is a current pressing issue, I want to caution that it's not a unique issue. And it's something that we'll have to continually have a conversation about. As long as, you know, our rights are threatened. Right?
I'd like to recognize an audience member.
Hi, I'm Roberta Chevret. I'm a communication studies professor and women's and gender studies faculty here at MTSU. And I wanted to speak quickly to this issue of like being an ally and member of the LGBTQ community as it relates to this theme of all identities pulling together. And I really enjoyed Dr. Franklin's welcoming address yesterday in that regard. But I think one of the biggest issues for someone who kind of studies rhetoric, public messaging, I always like immediately hear these things, or not immediately, but when they're in areas that I'm knowledgeable about, like queer theory, I hear people get up at the city council meeting and go, well, what about Hooters? And this is a problem. This is really, really a problem. This trying to fight LGBTQ marginalization with other forms of kind of patriarchal control, which is what that is. And it may not feel like it, but there was a film that Ali Sultan played during the LGBT film festival, where someone said in the film, just because I'm a lesbian doesn't mean I'm progressive. And that's true. And like your comment about the community containing a lot of different people, and some want to just go home and eat Pop-Tarts, but which Pop-Tarts are great. It's really important to think about the ways that patriarchy and LGBT, cis heteronormativity are so very linked, that when we point to women wearing little clothes and say, well, why is that okay? We're actually reinforcing the conversation, because really we should be arguing for sexual freedom, even if we are, like a sort of homonormative, go home to our spouse, believe in monogamy. Like, don't try to legislate it for others, because it's really, really damaging to the overall fight when you reinforce those controlling sexual systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I learned something.
Yes, steps all the way, yeah. That's a good one to end on. Yes, absolutely. Okay, let me check the time. We are ending. I want to thank you all for your participation today in this panel discussion. Our audience members came close and sat at the same table, even though they don't know each other. So we have, made some connections today, which is kind of the point of this whole thing, right? Making connections to one another. I want to thank our panel members for participating today. It was very brave of you. I'd like to present you with these gifts as and thank you. We are going to take a 15-minute